must adopt technology. This is an issue of, resources getting more and more scarce. There's less water, there's less land, there's less grass. Therefore, the farmers would not have the kind of land they used to have before, so they must adopt best practices in agriculture and modern technology. On the part of the herders, they must also adopt, modern technology such as ranching. But you see, these issues are also cultural as the economic and social. You need to persuade the average herdsman to go to a ranch for the simple reason that in his own world, it's not so much about how fat your cow is, but how many it is. A man with 100 heads of cattle is superior in his own mind to a person with just 50. But it has been proven that a cow on a ranch produces about 10 liters of milk a day, while the migratory cattle produces just about a liter a day. But then these are cultural issues, and you need a lot of persuasion, a lot of advocacy to allow them to migrate to that level. So what the government is doing right now is encouraging both farmers and herdsmen to adopt modern technology. And I'm happy to say that just yesterday, it was revealed that we are starting with about 10 states where we are going to have modern ranching. But the issue of farmers' herders clash must be located in its correct context, which is the fallout of demography, the fallout of climate change, and in some cases also pure criminality. We must also not rule out the fact that the wars and the insurgencies right from Libya to Mali to Chad to Niger have also made people, have made small arms accessible to people that never had access to them before. So in trying to address these issues, we must address it from a holistic viewpoint. I think it's too facile and too easy to try and look at religion and ethnicity as a driving factor, the driving factors of these clashes. Thank you.
Before you drop the microphone, this is more like an ambush for you, Minister. And that's because the constituency here is the press, worldwide press, the International Press Institute. And I have the honor of the president to be amongst us. One of our journalists have been in incarceration for 2 years, Jones Abiri. Are you aware of that? And what's going to happen to him? There's no access to him at all. And the IPI is very concerned about this, and so are we, who are also members of the IPI.
I would have been very surprised if you had not ambushed me. So I was expecting that. Actually, I just met with a member of the I think Committee for Protection of Journalists just about half an hour ago. And I told him, I said, I, as Minister of Information, I was not aware that anybody was under incarceration. And he admitted, yes, that the Minister of Information was never informed. And we've agreed to meet tomorrow after this meeting to see what we can do about it. Number one, we have to determine who is a journalist, what is offense. But until this morning, when I was sent an email, I was not aware of this.
Thank you very much. We'll take your word for that. Okay, this is a near ambush, not an ambush. The Africa Free Trade Agreement. Where are we with it? I know that we didn't sign it. They said, yes, it was good that we didn't sign it because we had to protect our own. And because of what happened to the ACP, we have experiences of the ACP agreement in the past. What are we doing with it? If we're not signing, what's our strategy?
Thank you. I actually think it's a good question, so thank you for raising it. I think the first thing to say about the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is, why is it even in view today? Why are we looking at it today? And it goes back to the aspiration of African countries, to increase Africa trade and African economic integration. In itself is a laudable goal, and it's been from the top. In other words, the African AU Summit, as we call them, the heads of government and heads of state, have said they want to see an economic arrangement that would increase Africa? And the answer to that was this African Continental Agreement. Having said that, what has happened, even though deadlines were set, to get to a framework agreement, which is what was supposed to have happened in the first few months of this year, by the time we got there, and Nigeria did participate in the process of getting to that point, we recognized, particularly under the leadership of the president, that for such a landmark agreement, if you don't carry the stakeholders along, meaning the main players in the economy, they have every legitimate reason to question first what's in the agreement and what will be the consequences for them. And that's really what happened. Because what happened, like I said before, was that the agreement was led, in a sense, top-down. The heads of government said, we want to get to a framework agreement. The ministers and negotiators worked on what that framework would look like, with the idea that you would then go back and consult in your respective countries to fill in, the blank spaces, what they call the work program, which is basically you identify the things you would, exclude from the agreement and so on. That's what was supposed to happen after the framework. But in our own case, the question was legitimately asked to say, even that framework agreement, what does it contain? The president then directed us to basically engage all the stakeholders, starting from sort of the key people in government and then the stakeholders in the country, with a view to first explaining what's in the framework, getting their views on it, and making sure that we work at it collectively in going forward. Now, why that's important is that, as you know, this is an agreement for the next 1,500 years. So this is not one of those races where the first person to sign wins any prize. I mean, it's not about speed. It's about doing it right. So what we've been doing since the president gave that directive is basically consulting with the various stakeholders over the last 8 weeks. And those consultations are now nearing an end. We're now just basically putting finishing touches to it, which will then be presented to the president, and then we'll discuss the findings with him, and then we'll go forward from there. But I think I want to emphasize that in terms of Nigeria and our commitment to Africa or to the region, I mean, that remains strong. Obviously, you have to do an agreement of that nature in a way that will be win-win. I mean, there's no country that works against its own interest, even for love of its continent or its region. So I think it's a very legitimate thing, the way we're going about it. And in fact, one of the things we're hoping is that all the stakeholders will be involved in the way forward as well, so that this is not a question of government telling, the sort of business community what to do.
If I may chip in China here, what's our strategy with China?
What about China?
China, with kind of trade we're doing with them.
Well, I think and
I have Ethiopia in mind when I say this.
So talking about China, I think the first thing to say about China, China has been very deliberate about its commitment to engage in Africa. And I believe that commitment is because China views Africa as, being complementary to its own aspirations. On the one hand, as you know, China has developed in a way where they're now exporting capital, and of course, they're exporting goods and services as well. On the other hand, they recognize that Africa needs infrastructure, Africa needs trading partners, and Africa needs, basically to do more for itself in order to reach our full potential. So what they've done is to offer, to partner with us, certainly in terms of investing in our infrastructure, and also to partner with us in terms of trade, and so on and so forth. And I would say that, if that partnership is developed right, it will be a win-win partnership. And certainly it can be done in a way that is not injurious to our own interests, particularly in terms of employment, which, as you know, really is our number one priority in terms of, finding work for our people. But I would say the work China is doing with Nigeria as an example in terms of infrastructure is great. As you know, they're involved in building railways and some other infrastructure things we're doing. Let me also make the point that it's not an exclusive relationship. In other words, there is nothing we're doing with China that excludes any part of the world. And we always make this point when we go around, because the fact that we're working with China, in fact, our needs are so many and so extensive that we need more relationships with Europe, with the US, and as you know, our approach is engaging all the stakeholders. We're not sort of saying China to the exclusion of others.
Let me come to you now, Ms. Minister of Finance, while you pass on the microphone to her, and ask you, when you're on with Bates, have you been able to take one step backwards to say,